Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Chitheads podcast. My guest today is T.S. Little. T.S.'s unique and skillful approach enables students to find greater depth of understanding and awareness in their practice, both on and off the mat. His approach to the practice is interdisciplinary, passionate, intelligent, innovative, and full of insight. T.S. synthesizes years of study in classical yoga, Sanskrit, Buddhist studies, anatomy, massage, and trauma healing. He began studying the work of BKS Iyengar in 1984 and lived in Mysore, India in 1989, studying Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga with Pattabhi Jois. His teaching brings together precision of alignment, anatomical detail, and a profound meditative experience. T.S. is a licensed massage therapist, and his somatic studies include in-depth training in craniosacral therapy. His practice and teaching are influenced by the work of Ida Rolf, Moshe Feldenkrais, and Thomas Hanna. T.S. is a longtime student of the meditative arts and Buddhist studies, beginning with Vipassana and continuing in Tibetan Buddhism and Zen. His teaching style is unique in being able to weave together poetic metaphor with clear instruction filled with compassion and humor. T.S. earned a master's degree in Eastern philosophy from St. John's College in Santa Fe in 1998, and he is the author of 4 books: The Thread of Breath, Meditations on a Dewdrop, Yoga of the Subtle Body, and The Practice is the Path, which is his latest book, which we'll be talking a little bit about today. So hello, T.S. Welcome back to the Chitheads podcast.
Hi, Jacob. Wonderful to hear you, and thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to chat with you again. You were episode 67 of Chitheads, and now we're in the 120s somewhere. And I've said this a few times, but I said that after episode 100, I was going to go back and re-interview some of the people from the first 100 episodes. And of course, you were high on that list, so here we are. But since that time, which has been, I guess it's about 3 years ago now, at least, we've worked on a few things together. You gave the very first talk for the yoga seminar, which is still continuing, a little bit of a different offering now, but still continues. You offered a wonderful talk on Shavasana as being the most important pose. You've done a course with us on meditation, and you're involved in our yoga philosophy program. And of course, you'll be teaching another course with us in the new year at the beginning of 2021 on Darshan, Yoga and the Art of Seeing. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the content of that soon. So how's it been going, T.S.? We're in this time of COVID, so everything sort of flipped on its head. How have things been for you at this time?
Oh, let's see. Challenging, of course, and I very much, feel into the suffering globally of all sentient beings at this time, and yet I also note that it's a call to become more adaptable. We're such adaptable mammals, in our lives can change very readily when we apply ourselves, and so I'm having to shapeshift, to begin again in many ways, and to find creative ways to express. And that in of itself has been a rich minefield of opportunity.
So you say adaptability, which of course is kind of built into the yogic teachings as an important thing to draw on right now. Is there anything else, from the teachings of yoga that you feel have become particularly useful at a time such as this?
Well, I think so. I think, certainly presencing ourselves through mindfulness is so important. I know that, when people experience stress and their active winds get blown upward into neck and head, and there's lots of anxiety, fear, and sleeplessness, it makes us more vulnerable to being intolerant and not as sensitive and present. So I think this is a greater time to be kind and to be patient and to be receptive. And so certainly I practice that for myself and for my family, my immediate family, wife and child, and all of those who the few that I get to encounter these days.
this experience of COVID and its aftermath and ramifications have been really transforming the yoga scene. It's hard to know what it will look like when this is all over, because certainly many of the long-standing studios have been completely decimated by, this event. So I'm curious how you see this kind of changing the yoga community. And, are there good things that are coming out of this besides alongside the perhaps not so good things like people losing some of their businesses and livelihood?
Well, sure. I think the industry, like many industries, is really in a spin now, and I think it's exciting. I think that the yoga industry got really bloated from all of the training curricula that's offered so quickly, and just the supply and the demand made it such that yoga really expanded so fast. And so now there's a pruning. I think the big yoga tree is pruned. That may be a good thing for people have to really decide, well, gee, is this going to be my lifeline? Is this going to be my career? And those of course of us who are very drawn to learning and deepening our understanding have such a wonderful opportunity to study online with people in the field of anatomy and physiology, as well as the Dharma, meditation, and yogic practices, yoga philosophy. And so it's a fantastic time to be a student if you're willing to put yourself in the park and do Zoom asana.
uh, I love your hybrid asana and contemporary words thing that you did. I was just listening actually to our first interview together. We covered a lot of ground, and it was quite a wonderful conversation. But I was triggered into hysterics every time you attached asana to something. So I'm sure that will stay the same today. You've obviously had to move everything online, and of course, observing you do a really wonderful job at hosting online events, and of course, you're continuing collaborations with us and other platforms. Has this, changed kind of your experience of your own student community? Like, how has this shifted from, you being primarily a kind of in-person teacher and with your wonderful center in Santa Fe? How has that shifted your kind of experience of community?
Well, I think it has reworked and redesigned our community, and we have lots of new students who have come in, and it's exciting to be able to touch lives who otherwise wouldn't be able to schlep 2,000, 3,000 miles or over the ocean to study with us. So what a blessing that one can receive the teachings in their own living room. And of course, I find the real challenges of being in front of the screen is is it really aligned with the soul journey? I think a lot of us may find ourselves asking that question: is it a selling out of the soul? Is it a way of sort of cheapening or somehow overexposing? I think of the Native American peoples who never wanted to have their picture taken, and then here we are oftentimes showing our face for long stretches of time out into the public. And so I personally do a lot of protective work where after I've been, exposing on the computer camera, I take time to really nourish back inside. And I think that helps keeps me grounded. And I encourage my students to do the same. So it's not so disembodying just being in front of the camera.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I've been staring at the computer screen through the work with embodied philosophy for a long time before COVID, and even just looking away, that whole 20-20-20 rule of looking away from the screen for 20 seconds, 20 feet. What is it? 20 seconds, 20 feet, 20 something. Forgetting what the other 20 is. But even that just helps to kind of, give you a moment away from the virtual reality. One of the things that we touched on at the end of the interview last time was the art of self-practice. And as I was listening you just talk about that, just pointed out how central and important that is now. And so I was wondering if you'd talk about self-practice a little bit and, for those who are perhaps not sure how to begin, especially in a climate where a lot of times we're kind of in a way sort of made dependent upon teachers in various ways. And we can't really imagine, where we would begin to develop such a home practice. And some might think they need, a teacher training to even be able to start such a thing. What are some of your kind of suggestions for students that maybe don't want to practice yoga in front of a screen every time they do?
Right. Well, this is a very good question, really, at this time. And because it's important for all of us, I think, to have time for cocooning inward in the flow of our life. That is, we have a time to reflect, to pray, to breathe, to feel, what conversation from yesterday, how did it affect my nervous system? What are my memories of myself as a young child? And what are my feelings? How do I feel about myself in the world today? And so that reflective time is extremely important. I hope that everyone will be able to carve out 20 minutes, usually first thing in the morning when we first get up, take our pee and go right to our cushion and just have that time to cherish in silence, in stillness, and with the prana, with the breath. Then I think we begin to trust our own inner process, and then once we get on the train of our inner process, it's a long journey down the tracks, and everything, all that we experience, becomes part of that train. And so this is what we loosely call self practice. And some people never make it out of the station. But once you do, you feel like, oh, well, this is really my ride. This is how I'm going to process all that it comes up for me and those around me. So then we add to that via the support of teachers online, whether it's practices or meditations or pranayama. And then I think that's a really good way to feed our base, which is a self empowerment time, self reflective time. So I think if one is judicious in using online teachings to support their own self practice, that's ideal.
Yeah. I really appreciate that when I asked you this question, you went straight to meditation first, waking up, taking your pee, which I notice is always the sequence that you offer, which for me is certainly always the case as I get older in years. And I'm wondering how you feel about this. I mean, obviously you're a teacher. One of the things I really respect about you is your emphasis on the subtle practices, but perhaps many people listening would have assumed that self-practice meant asana. And that's kind of the go-to when someone thinks about yoga in our kind of contemporary world. Do you, see this as problematic, this kind of over this conflation of yoga with specifically asana?
Well, that's ties into your previous question, Jacob, which is such a good one, is how is the industry changing? And if the industry will become less calisthenic based and less exercise based, then people will use their time at home to be able to process the anxiety or the fear or the uncertainty or the loss of a loved one and grieving. So then the practice becomes the way we live our lives, or, per the title of my recent book, the practice is the path. So then everything that enters through us in our life and encounter all of our relations, that they become part of this introspective process, or what's called in contemporary psychology interoception. So we're really seeing into how the world affects us. And so it's quite helpful because, we do make our own reality. We see the world in the way that we are conditioned to see it, and that can change. And so that's a good thing that the practice not only be about taking care of ligaments, connective tissue, bones, glandular activity, and brainstem, but also really about attending to the soul, or attending to what the Greeks call the pneuma, the life force, the spirit. And so I think it's about education is that, wow, I'm not only going to do downward dog and triangle, but I'm going to sit or do yoga nidra or listen to a meditation and deepen my connection inside.
Yeah. Well, it certainly seems like the events of 2020 have made, the need for more than simply asana, basically an imperative. So um, perhaps we wish we would have gotten there without the pressure of 2020, but I guess, anything helps. So let's talk about, you're mentioning your new book, The Practice is the Path. So let's talk a little bit about that book for a moment. I'll read the full title. It's The Practice is the Path, Lessons and Reflections on the Transformative Power of Yoga. First, T.S., I just was curious, why did you write this book? What inspired you to write this book right now?
Well, I really wanted to share my own experience, which started, really in a very fast and a very active type of practice, a kind of power practice, and then just how, after being on the train on the path for many many years, it's my practice has really morphed. I've stayed with it, and it's been such a source of nourishment for me. And so I really wanted to share what I've felt and encountered along the path, like working with right effort, which is one of the foundational teachings in the Buddhist training. Is how do we apply ourselves with just the right amount of effort? Do we over effort? Do we under effort? And looking at ourselves as a striver, as trying to please others, as wanting to be liked, as wanting to be approved of in the yoga room, and with the mirrors, and with the sweaty bodies in scantily clad clothes. It's like, well, am I good enough? How can I get better? Oh, and I'll never be good enough. And so then I started to really listen to all the messages that were dropping into my inbox, which, as a male yogi, were many. It's like, wow, I need to be more strong as a male yogi, or I need to be able to experience ultimate enlightenment, and my mind not move, and I need to, be conquest this practice, so that I'm on top of the mountain. And so I really had to look carefully at my own striver, and that's been incredibly valuable as I look at my own pride, my own shame, my own longings, my own fears, and how they all got marbled into my downward dog and my vinyasa, unbeknownst to me. So I wanted to share some of that in the book, with practices like right effort, or chapters like right effort, and how speed gets trapped in the body, and working with beginner's mind, and the always one of my favorite topics, the quest for the perfect pose, is how we oftentimes, as I have struggled with for many years, wanted to be perfect, wanted to get everything just right.
Mm. Well, I want to talk about a few of these things in turn, but I want to go back to something that you mentioned, which I thought was a really interesting part of the book, which is the pitfalls of getting attached to a particular discipline, and kind of having this rigidity around, oh, well, I have to do it this way, and I have to follow this lineage, blah blah blah. And you encourage this flexibility, which I think is totally warranted. But as I was reading it, I was wondering, there is this tendency within the yoga community, particularly in a kind of consumerist, driven yoga community, to always be seeking sort of the next best thing. It's like the new branded yoga. And we have this, this common term, salad bar spirituality, where people are just picking and choosing the things that really predicate their own ego, right? So they essentially buffer themselves up rather than engage those things that perhaps might induce a more profound transformation. So, you emphasize the middle way. So I'm sure there's something in the middle here, but, just a little bit about on these two extremes. Like on the one hand, the extreme of over rigidity around a particular discipline. And then on the other hand, this kind of well, not having the ability to engage deeply with anything because you're always seeking something new.
Right. Good question, Jacob. It really comes down to identity. And many of us look to substitute an old identity, the identity that we've inhabited from the family of our upbringing or our religious background or our scholastic training or our experience as being an adopted child, whatever it might be. So then we substitute in another identity. It was certainly the case for me. It's like, well, now I identify with this type of lineage or this type of practice. And this is the mantra, this is the code, this is the series of poses we do. And we really kind of, shine our badge, polish our badge, like this is the new identity. And so I think there is a fair amount of substitution going on, and adapting Eastern spirituality has been a big part of that. And so then we start, at least for me, I've looked carefully at my identity maker, called the ahamkara in the Sanskrit. Literally means, the I maker, the I doer, or what the Buddha famously called in his direct experience of illumination. I've seen the architect of the builder of the house, meaning how we build ourselves up in various ways. And we may need that. We may need to work through shame and self-condemnation or lack of self-worth. We may need that empowerment for the first 10 years or so of practice, what I call the first stage of the journey. And then at some point, if we are exposed to the teachings and we have enough support from our therapist and our guides, our gurus, our coaches, then we're willing to start shedding some of those layers of identity. And so, oftentimes I peep into yoga classes, like these, when they were happening live, and say, well, people are really trying to embody a kind of identity that's empowering and that serves its place. But then there's this process of really shedding, what I was describing in the book as working with the exoskeleton, where we like a cicada dropping its shell. There's a kind of noise in any kind of identity formation that we might assume. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
there's a noise and there's also a discomfort, right? And it seems one of the things also that you talk about in your book, which I really appreciate, is the resistance to discomfort, or thinking that, the point of life or yoga is just to be blissed out all the time. And actually, one of the things you said in the last episode we did together was that in the bliss body is the body of sorrow, which was really beautiful. And so, how do you see this playing out in kind of the modern approach to yoga? And how can we get back past this this resistance to discomfort without, again, falling into the extreme of self-mortification, which is also a very real thing.
Hmm. Right. Well, accepting and being tolerant of discomfort is important, because I really don't think the path is about being free of any kinds of dukkha or unpleasantness. And so that makes us much more adaptable. Back to that idea again, is that we become more able to deal with when we can't get a signal, or our 16-year-old starts to fall apart taking Zoom school classes, or when we get in a tiff with our partner. So then we really kind of need to hone that witness consciousness. And yeah, one passage actually comes to me from my book on the chapter called Not Knowing. Goes like this: as witness we are not separate remote like a satellite observing from on high, but rather find ourselves smack dab in the middle of circumstance. In the thick of our lives, we learn to witness and feel whatever's arising, whether pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. We witness not only the harmonious and the sublime, but also the mess, the hurt, and the longing. So I think if we become more emotionally adaptable, more pliable to accommodate all kinds of situations, including the long pandemic that we're in, then we have more resilience, more resiliency, and so it's not about simply making our connective tissues more pliable, but our heart more pliable. And I think, there's a lot of talk about spirituality. A lot of the yogic teachings around spirituality are essentially work with the emotional body, and I really encourage all yogis to work with what I call the subtle body, is little feelings of impatience or intolerance or shame or self doubt or this kind of thing.
Mm. So can you talk a little bit more about the importance of not knowing, which is one of my favorite teachings from your book, and it really resonated with. I was moderating a panel last week for AAR on the scholar practitioner, and one of the participants, Ramdas Lam, referred to ideologies of certainty, which I really loved this expression, ideologies of certainty, speaking about how, we have this kind of addiction almost to being certain and about things, and that certainty gets kind of wrapped up in our own, as you were saying, identity, and so it's like our identity becomes sort of synonymous with what we know. And I feel like that's particularly true in the United States, especially with these rigid kind of political silos that we're seeing. So can you talk a little bit about, the importance of not knowing from your perspective, and how we can slip into that through our practice?
Yeah, I think that not knowing is something we need to tuck into our shirt pocket and really take with us in every encounter. I certainly do it in this interview now. Like, I don't know where we'll be in 3 minutes from now, and that calling to welcome not knowing is enables us to live with uncertainty. And if there's anything we've experienced in the last 9 months during the pandemic, it's just how great and uncertain things are. So, in a practical sense, we don't know what will happen 2 hours, 2 days, 2 months from now. But then, of course, in the Dharma, in the training of mind heart, we must somehow at some point encounter our own the ways in which we start to construct or to imagine how things should be. And in that sense, we're always getting in our own way. We're always stepping on our own toes, about our own assumptions, our own beliefs, our own expectations about what yoga is or what enlightenment is. And so in that sense, when we really open to, wow, I don't know how to open myself up. I really don't know how to do that. When we are vulnerable and receptive and attuned, that's when something else can come in much greater than ourselves. Otherwise, we just get trapped in some small version of me, some iteration of me. And so that's really, we walked out to the very edge of the cliff if we are ready to, and we say, well, look, I really don't know how to get to this next level. For me, oftentimes that comes up in a dream where, like for instance, in my own dream work, I'll experience this moment where I'm on the edge and I can't take, I'm on a cliff and there's a very small passage and I can't take a next step. And how do I do that? I can't do that on my own. So in the shamanic journey or in the spiritual training, then there's another force. There are allies, entities, animal totems gods, stones that come in that can shepherd us to the next level. So, now we're sort of getting more into the world of dream and the world of the Sambhogakaya, or the world of mystery. But that's where really profound change occurs. So I'm always trying to get out of my own way, and the best teachers I've had over the years are those who show me how to get out of my own way.
So let's talk a little bit about you mentioning dreams, and you're actually giving a talk coming up soon for the yoga seminar on dreams, yoga dreams and transformation, I think. Is the name of the talk. What is the significance of dreams, and how can we as yoga practitioners start to leverage or harness or connect to our dreams if we don't feel already a kind of connection?
Right. Well, certainly, the dream state is one that yogis have pointed to for millennia as a valuable way of working with the depth psyche, the vertical descent into really the underworld, what's referred to in the Greek mythology as down into the subterranean depths of the realm of Hades and the river Styx. And Persephone, who was the daughter of Zeus, made this descent into the underworld, and so we, through many traditions, there's this importance of at some point, ducking down underneath the everyday consciousness of computers and messages coming into my inbox and my to-do list. And how do we do that? Dreams are really a great portal. Nighttime dreams, a really great portal into that realm. Could be also daytime dreams if you can just be still for long enough. Maybe you lie on your back and stare up at your living room ceiling, or go on a walk and stare out over the ocean or up into the sky. It's like, what might come to me in this time of rest? And then there'll be little snippets of memory and feeling and longing and terror and fear and that surface. And then we really harvest. We really say that a dream unworked is like a letter unopened. And so we have these little gifts come to us. And if we start attending to them, like a gardener will to his or her plants, we start attending to what comes to us in those moments when we're not so busy or trying to get the job done, then we can really start to see, what's underneath the surface of my busy mind. And it's remarkable. There's a whole ocean there to like a scuba diver to drop into. And it takes a little training to be able to get under the surface. Usually the ego doesn't want us to go under the surface. It says, hey, look, stay with your to-do list. Hey, look, you've got so much to do. Don't pay any attention there. Keep working harder, keep on top of things. And so there's resistance on the ahamkara, the egoic side, to even starting to drop down. But it's important, of course, because many teachings describe this surface consciousness of computer screens and to-do lists and job descriptions as a kind of spell, that we're cast in a spell. And so we start breaking that spell when we can get underneath. And so, even just remembering a dream fragment, just 2 days ago, I remembered a dream fragment of a friend of mine who I knew from third grade. And then I went back and I, did some communion with Mike Purple, and what was it like to sleep at his house? And, what was it like for my, 8-year-old imagination? What did I feel? And how did I think about myself in the world? And so that allowed me to do a kind of musing and reflecting. And it was just the smallest of dream fragments.
Mm, yeah. I appreciate what you're saying. It's beautiful. And it reminds me of something you had said just at the tail end of the last episode. So I'm glad we're talking a bit more about it, extensively about it now. You had said, you had advised or suggested the listeners to cultivate areas of your life that are like sleep. And you talked about it a moment ago when you were saying, lying on the floor. I was having this conversation with a friend. It seems like these sort of planned doing nothings, as it were, are kind of replacing what used to be a lot more spontaneous, right? It's like we used to be, I can't even remember the last time I was bored, because there's just always something, there's always some utensil, there's always something, there's some digital device to distract me. And it seems, it kind of begs the question of, well, did these moments of boredom and doing nothing that were just spontaneous because there wasn't much to do, did they serve a kind of biological purpose? And are these more cultivated nothings, like meditation or lying on the floor, or like you were saying, experiences that are like sleep but are not quite sleep? They kind of they're kind of biologically and spiritually necessary. Do you think that's true?
I do. I think contemporary neuroscience describes the brain or the nervous system this way, is that unfortunately today people, when they rest, they go to a default mode of anxiety. Like every time I, have a chance to catch my breath over my morning granola, or in the evening before I fall asleep, or first thing in the morning when I get up, my mind just goes lickety split, and it gets caught in these cycles of anxiety and stress. So that becomes our default mode. So what we need to do in these times of rest or sleep-like states, or serenity of embodying serenity, or shantam in the Sanskrit, the peace or stillness or repose or quiet, quietude, that we actually, our default mode becomes a place of quiet and nothingness, and so then the nervous system can regenerate. It's what happens hopefully during sleep, although people have very restless sleeps, of course, as well. But the more we can drop, that becomes our default mode, that place of rest. The greater the body, mind can self-regulate and heal. We're talking about the respiratory system, the endocrine system, hormonal system, the glandular system, digestion. So unfortunately, mind doesn't know that state of deep rest. No, I put in quotes. So so being idle, not doing, what in Chinese is called the Wu Wei, where the Taoists really celebrate, emphasize the not doing. It's said in the Tao Te Ching, in not doing, you achieve all things. And that's very hard. And for our Protestant work ethic of, here in the middle of the pandemic, it's like, oh, I've got to, my work is on the line, and my clientele I'm risking losing my clientele. I have to work harder. I have to go faster. And some of us are just caught in this whirlwind, this dust devil of a spin. So it takes time to find practices, whether it's leg up the wall pose, the sitting meditation, or shavasana, or supta baddha konasana, or just lying out underneath the pine trees, to just really allow our nervous system to get back to its place of really deep rest.
Mm. Yeah, that reminds me of something I once heard. In fact, maybe it was you at a workshop. This line: "The first thing to do is not to do," which has always stuck with me, and I like to quote that ad nauseum. It's interesting as you're talking about dreams. It's sort of making me reflect on how, when I am more relaxed, when I am more in a more restful state, I actually remember my dreams much more. Like when I'm more agitated, when I'm more stressed out, and in that kind of wagon of activity, I have less access to my dreams. And it just sort of makes me wonder if that state of agitation, it almost encourages the inability to see around or beyond the kind of cycles of Maya, and the various illusions that are kind of architecting our understanding of reality. And if we could just settle down and relax a bit, we not only get access to our dreams, but also kind of the associated creativity that permits us to even imagine something different than kind of the status quo that's so oppressive in various ways.
Well, that's right. And that's the spell, that's the trance that we're under. And according to, classical yoga teachings, it's called avidya, which literally means not seeing. We don't really see because we're so in the trance of what I have to do, and am I keeping up, and am I good enough, and I need to make more. And there's this, unfortunately, I think what's happened in 2020 with the virus wreaking havoc worldwide is that people unfortunately experience even greater corrosive ingrown thoughts of I'm not going to survive. So the survival mechanism kicks in, and that keeps us in the trance. And so how do we get out of the trance? Whether it's having enough experience in one's training to do meditation, or to spend enough time reflecting on dreams, or you have the help of a shaman, or, in the hallucinogenic communities today, it's a guided path into another altered state where it's either through psilocybin or ayahuasca. It's like, well, gee, I don't have to be in the trance. So, then we just need to train ourselves to change channels. And the channel, the spell of this world, here I am knocking on the table and palpating my hamstrings. This world is so spell inducing that it's very hard to change the channel. It's like, the old fashioned radio where you just get so much static. It's like, I can't hear anything. I'm just going to go back to this. I'm just going to go back to this channel of my to-do list, of my busy mind, oh, I need to make more. I can't let up. So when we learn to start to dial in enough to really hear what's the voices, the dream bits, the insights that are in this other coming from this other channel, that's when we start healing the subtle body, and when spiritually, emotionally, we can really evolve to the next level. And so it's really just learning to change channels so that there's not as much noise. We need to cut through the noise. And so what we do then is we start to feel more. A lot of it's getting back into the sensory realm of the gut, the gut chakra, the throat chakra, the third eye center. What's the feeling there? Because feelings in that sensory awareness, we can become we can attune more to subtle vibration. And that's very helpful to change channels.
Well, and you already kind of mentioned in passing the art of seeing, and so this is a great moment to segue into a discussion around the content of your upcoming course for embodied philosophy, which is called Darshan, Yoga and the Art of Seeing. So how does seeing further play into this theme of changing the channel? And what exactly do you mean by seeing here? I take it's something a little different from simply the physical sight that I am, seeing around me at any given moment.
Right. Well, when we're in the trance, we can only see in this, three-dimensional realm, and we can only see this world around us that seems really hard and fast and fixed. And so when we work with our own imagination, we work with our dreams, or we're in working with our reflections, we start to see the world as less solid, more fluid, and yet direct insight. Use the word vipassana, which is the really kind of backbone of all meditative trainings. Gaining some insight into the thoughts I'm having today, or the voices inside of me. I can hear that voice, or listen into that voice inside of myself. And should I continue to listen to that voice or not? And so it's through this process of listening and seeing that we over time will have more choice in our life, about what's good for me and what's appropriate for me, what's best for me, and how can I trust this very process. So in the course, with embodied philosophy, we're going to look at the importance of being seen. It's when, we can really be seen or be heard, is that we can heal. And like, for instance, I have a teenage son. And, when I just really listen to him, I stop everything I'm doing and I just listen, or I just look right at him, look right into his eyes. And so when we can see the other, it's when we develop a relationship. If we can't quite see, we all get marooned. We're all, islands away from each other. So it's when we're seen, of course, in the spiritual context in India, when we're seen by the God, or we in the darshan, where you go to a temple and there's a figure inside the temple, and many of the pilgrims will jockey to get into position so they can be seen by the deity. And I always wondered, what is that? In my various voyages, pilgrimages to India, it's like, what are people doing? Like, what is that to actually stand in front of the icon of the deity? It's when we're actually seen that allows us to heal. We are received, and there's an exchange that occurs that's really powerful, a kind of transmission that occurs. So that's something that happens when we're in relationship with others, or oftentimes it comes up in a dream. It's like, wow, I was with an old coach, or an old band instructor, and he or she was just there witnessing me. Because oftentimes we are not witnessed enough, of course, in our life. So that direct witnessing is a real path to healing.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing up this, seeing. It's not just about us seeing something. It's also about being seen and the relationship around that. And I agree with you that the time I spent in India as well, I think it's such a fascinating feature of their spiritual relationships with deity, this idea of being seen by the deity. And it also kind of brings up sort of the role, for me at least, the role or the status of visual objects or art more generally in kind of this practice of the art of seeing. And so I'm curious where that comes in and what the significance is of having sort of symbols and deity forms and yantras and other kind of, for lack of a better word, spiritual art that we might see or that might see us.
Right. Well, the murti, Murti, is the likeness of the divine. And so the murti can have, infinite number of expressions. And thus, it's really a polymorphous imagination. There's so many ways to actually encounter the energy of the divine or the sacred, or the beautiful, the aesthetic, which is such an important experience. So art serves this purpose, whether it's a relief of an image of the Buddha or a Bodhisattva like Manjushri or Avalokiteshvara, or an image of Shiva, or a yantra where you have geometric designs and color. So really that invokes the mind, the awareness, to harness to the aesthetic experience of beauty or the likeness of the divine that manifests as geometry or color. And so that is really an invitation to see outside the spell again. And the direct experience of beauty, we experience that oftentimes practicing, poses like half moon or Dhanurasana, the bow pose. It's like, wow, that's a really sublime feeling in my fascia. That's an aesthetic feeling. or when we're in a meditation and our mind, finally just subsides for a moment. It's like, there's this flavor, there's this taste that arises, which is really aesthetically pleasing. And so when we can attenuate, when we can yoke to that, when we can embrace it, it kind of helps to pull us out of our blind spot, out of that spell, and then we open to the realm of beauty and appreciation and sensitivity. It makes us more sensitive, and Americans, we live, of course, in think of the big interstates and the big avenues with box stores, your Walmart or your KFC, or just endless commercial strips that really don't invoke beauty at all. So, there's a dearth of beauty in our direct experience. So, I think the more we can experience that aesthetic beauty, which in the flip side, of course, is terror, or where we get frozen in a frozen state away from that aesthetic. We need to work with both sides of our nervous system and imagination. Then we can, really start to, breaking the spell. And so I think the darshan, or the seeing, allows for this kind of yoking, or this connection.
Yeah, one of the things that as you're speaking is sort of coming to mind is it seems like one of the results of kind of the, I don't know, the art industry, the gallery industry, or however you want to call it, is that it sort of categorizes art and beauty in this sort of, entertainment arena. It's like, oh, and entertainment, of course, is always something that's sort of, it's just icing on the cake. It's sort of, it's not necessary to our basic needs, but it's, it's over there for us to enjoy when we have, the privilege and the time to do so. And I take it, from what you're saying, that you see kind of the experience of beauty and the cultivation of the kind of vision and seeing that's associated with it as being really central to our healing, our spiritual journey, and maybe life itself.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's a real longing. There's a real need for the imaginary realm to flourish. And so this day and age, everybody is on the couch from 6 to 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. on Netflix or Amazon Prime, and it's in the pandemic, watching episode after episode. And I do it too. There's a way in which we need our imagination to flourish. So then in the yogic journey, how do we do that? There are ways which the imagery that I'd like to touch on in the course on Darshan and the Art of Seeing, imagery evokes that. And then, of course, image of the divine, or image of the geometrical shape, or image of the Buddha, but also through our dreams, many images. I mean, basically, circumstances in dreams are just images. And so then we work with our own personal history. What's our own image bank? We have a whole storehouse of images in our consciousness, many of which we disregard, or we deny, or we overlook. And when we start to work with our own storehouse of images, it's a way which we can really journey. We can really make progress on the path, and so certainly in the dream time, it's food, it's images of food, it's images of disgust, it's images of hiding, images that come about from leaving home or returning home, images that relate to loss or shame. So lots of categories where these images fall into. And then when we start to really attend to them, that's what starts shifting our subtle body. So, long before television, radio, Wi-Fi connection, in the yogic teachings, there were lots of images. I always remember in the westward migration of the Indian teachings across the Gobi steppes into China on the Silk Road. There were, basically merchants traveling, and then in China, there's just this remarkable Buddhist monastery built into the sandstone bluff, and it's just stories of these merchants coming into these caves where there were just phenomenally, colorful images of the bodhisattvas. It was really phantasmagoric. It was just really hallucinogenic. It was really wild, and you could see how it enabled these believers or these merchants to change their belief system and say, "Wow, this has really opened up a whole nother part of my imagination." So really, this image making, such a long history, is an important part of the long history of yogic practices working with the mind.
Yes, well, I'm certainly excited for the course, and I know it will be a great one, like all of your courses are. So, I'd like to encourage everyone listening, if you're interested, to check it out. I don't believe it's quite open for enrollments yet, but if you're on the Embodied Philosophy mailing list, you'll receive an update as soon as it is. So, T.S., it's been wonderful chatting with you this afternoon. As usual, it's great to see you and talk to you. Is there anything else, based on what we've been talking about, and in terms of, the art of seeing or dreams, or anything else that we touched on today that you'd like to kind of close with or remark upon?
Let's see. Yeah, I think in a practical way that listeners can, if everyone sits for 15 minutes and just make an open invitation, like, what needs to come to me now? What might need to surface? And there might be all kinds of more superficial thoughts about yesterday, today, and tomorrow, or there might just bubble up a memory, a thought, a image, and then one can work with that. One can then sort of hold that delicately in one's hand, and just notice, commune with that image that comes out of your own memory bank, and be exploratory, see where it goes. So that's maybe a real practical practice that the listeners can attend to
Yeah,
right
I
away.
love that question. What might need to surface? I think it's a good takeaway as we close the conversation. Well, thank you so much, T.S. I've been speaking to T.S. Little, our second conversation after episode 67, the first episode with T.S. on the Chitheads podcast. We've been speaking today about his latest book, The Practice is the Path, Lessons and Reflections on the Transformative Power of Yoga, as well as topics related to T.S.'s upcoming offerings at Embodied Philosophy. Thank you so much, T.S. It's been such a pleasure.
You're most welcome, Jacob. It's a joy to share with you. Bye for now.